Hey everyone, Professor Snart here checking in as we are just finishing up, or have finished up, I suppose, units 1 and 2, due last Friday, May 30th, and now turn around, as you can see fairly quickly, to units 3 and 4, another due date, Tuesday, June 3rd, where 2 units are due. So just a quick look at what's involved with some of those. So what you'll probably notice here is that our course is set up where we've obviously done some introductions, and we spend the first couple of units here, 2, 3, 4, really thinking in fairly broad terms about working like a writer or being a writer, or having that sort of mindset. But by the same token, also thinking fairly specifically about how language works really effectively to communicate, image and meaning, and sort of have an impact on the reader. So we're certainly not just journalists reporting a bunch of facts, but imparting or suggesting some kind of meaning in our use of that language. So Unit 3 has us looking at and thinking about one of the really fundamental types of language that we end up using. And there's obviously a number of related terms here, that kind of thinking through analogy, one thing being like another. So metaphor, simile, any type of comparative language like that is really important for us. There's this sort of funny clip from a movie called Renaissance Man. The YouTube and copyright is pretty finicky, as you might have discovered already. So this is a newer version of the clip that I've had to find, and the audio is kind of poor, but you get the idea. The better example is this one from Forrest Gump. It's become pretty much a cliche at this point. The life is like a box of chocolates. So an evocative simile that compares, and it's a good example because it compares things of a certain type that is exactly what we're concerned about for this particular unit. So the simile isn't a comparison of one really specific concrete thing to another specific concrete thing. It's not the comparison of one very abstract big idea to another abstract big idea. It's the comparison of life, the big abstract thing, to this very specific, tangible, relatable sort of object. And that is at least one way in which simile or comparative language can work most effectively, because it takes this thing that we are it's almost too big to think about, this idea of life, the universe, history, whatever, love, the abstract, and it literalizes it in this much more accessible kind of way. And of course, he, in the example, extends the analogy a little bit. I'll let you watch the clip, bringing back all kinds of memories, I'm sure. But the discussion board assignment then is basically to just not come up with, but to report on a simile that you find. Lots of people find them in things that they're reading or song lyrics, very common use of simile. So there's certainly no wrong answer exactly in terms of what's a good or a bad simile. There's lots of cliched ones like the Forrest Gump example, but one person's cliche is another person's first time hearing it. So the bigger part to pay attention to here is this formula that I've provided, and I'm actually having you fill in as part of the discussion board, is to really be conscious of how the simile or the analogy works in terms of bringing a very abstract thing that's hard to think about in any literal form, sort of bringing it to life or bringing it closer to us, making it more thinkable through comparison to something, the concrete thing, like the box of chocolates, right? The comparison to something that is a little more manageable for our minds to think about. And honestly, even though the simile you might find might be fairly narrowly focused or not all-encompassing, this approach to language, the way we can kind of remake the world and encourage readers to think about, right, old things in new ways, or complicated things not in simplistic ways, but in approachable ways. That's really one of the most fundamental language building blocks that we have as as writers. So the discussion board is relatively straightforward, and again, I'm asking you to be quite specific about your application of the formula here, but that type of language we're looking at here is really, really crucial as a building block to being a good writer. So not an overly complicated unit, but one that is really important for us in terms of building that foundation to be good writers. Unit 4 is a really fun one, I think. In addition to a couple of reading assignments and a brief little thing about a sort of theory of short stories, we have this fun assignment called Significant Object. So it takes the idea, is actually borrowed from this radio program called Marketplace, in which they featured a book called Significant Objects. And the goal of the book, or the challenge of the book, was to hire or conscript a bunch of writers, some famous, some not so famous, to take what's called a tchotchke, or these little, trinkets, and write, to give them value by writing an interesting backstory to it. So obviously something like this little, I don't know, what is that, a goat, pig, the bunny, this little object here, it may have personal meaning to somebody, but you wouldn't be able to sell that, because your personal meaning is important to me, but it's not really important to me in terms of, I'm not going to pay for something that just because it's important to you. But if we can write a backstory for it, and they weren't trying to lie to anybody in the book, and create, try to trick people into writing these backstories that weren't actually true. They were very upfront that these are fictionalized accounts. But if you can tell a story about this thing that gives it sort of intrinsic value, so that it's valuable to anybody, not just to you, that's really the challenge. And it's a fun writing assignment because it's narrowly focused. You have this object that you pick as kind of your centerpiece to work with, and of course you're limited in terms of the number of words you have, so you have to be really descriptive but also conscious of not just going on and on and on, and of course you're choosing your own, you're not just using the one that's provided here. So the challenge, and this is sort of what I look for when I grade the thing, is have you made the object significant for somebody else? In other words, if you tell me, or your backstory is simply that your mother owned this and she gave it to you and you really like your mother, so that's why it's valuable. Well, okay, that's valuable to you, but is there a way that you can tell me a story, fictional of course, with lots of, kind of quirky details, and they tend to be sort of funny because we're looking for something that's a little unusual here. Can you tell me a story about it that makes it significant or valuable to me because it has this unusual history? So again, a fairly simple or straightforward assignment, but that's actually a lot more challenging than you might first realize. And as usual, a big part of what we're doing here in the discussion board, you'll see, has you writing the post, but also replying to others. So your audience is really becoming other members of the class. Okay. Keep on top of things as we keep rolling through our course here, and be sure to be in touch if you have any questions. I'll talk to you soon.